This is JCU Conversations, a podcast show from James Cook University, Singapore. Tune in as we ask experts in the industry more about their lives and their approach to success. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's listen to today's episode.
Hi, I'm Associate Professor Caroline Wong, Associate Dean for Learning and Teaching at James Cook University. Our guest today is Professor Jason Pomeroy. He is the founding principal of Pomeroy Studio and Pomeroy Academy. Professor Jason is an award-winning sustainable design expert, architect, and TV presenter, and is one of the leading figures in creating greener, smarter cities. He is also a television presenter, lecturer, and author. Welcome, Jason. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, I will run through a few questions if that's okay with you.
Of course.
Yeah. So what inspired you to pursue a career in sustainable design and architecture?
Well, I guess, first of all, it was the architecture. And when I was 8 years old, my father took me to St. Paul's Cathedral and he performed some trickery. We went to the dome of St. Paul's and he whispered along the curvature of the wall in the Whispering Gallery, and I could hear him clearly. And I thought, my goodness, this is magic. You know, who did this? And I kind of thought, this is really quite special. And he said, this is Sir Christopher Wren. He was an architect, he was an astronomer, a mathematician, surveyor, general to the king. And I thought, this multidisciplinarian was able to put something so captivating together. This is what I want to pursue. And that was my first foray into wanting to be an architect. But I guess the element of sustainability comes down to frugality, because I used to love borrowing whatever I could to make things as a child. So in my parents' back garden in London, I would have these bits of wood and timber, and I'll borrow my mother's blankets and I'll be making these wigwam tents. And I guess that's the first sense of frugality and using what is available to me to create a bit of architecture. So fast forward a few years, go to university. That element of frugality still interested me. I loved the idea of using natural light, natural ventilation, locally sourced materials in my designs. And I guess the term sustainability wasn't really around then. You know, I am slightly older than people think. And so I guess, was my introduction to trying to do things that are smarter, leaner, cleaner, greener. And that's what brought me here today.
Fantastic. Is that how the element of creativity flows in you?
I think so. I think there is always a starting point for any designer, and they all have their own particular method. For me, I would like to define it as these 3 Ds. My creative output is based on, first of all, distilling, the first D, learning the lessons from the past, because many of those greatest lessons have already been tried and tested. It's almost like the survival of the fittest ideas. After you've distilled those lessons from the past, I like to design for the present. And that's being able to use the latest technologies and ensure that whatever we're doing is right for the people of the time. But we also need to then do the 3rd D, which is to disseminate. And that element of dissemination will be good for future generations, so that they can learn from our mistakes or our glories or our new findings. And hopefully that's the way that we can continue to progress.
Wow, what a great teacher of architecture. I understand that your work spans various parts of the world.
Yeah.
Right? I've seen a lot of your TV presentations on cities. So what's one project that has left a particularly significant impact on you?
That's a really good question. I think there are obviously projects that I'd like to look over the garden fence and see other architects and designers work. But I would have to say that many of those are historical precedents. I still look towards the works of Sir Christopher Wren for their architectural beauty, but their ability to use technological ingenuity during that particular Baroque era. When I think of the the more indigenous works of the local builders in Southeast Asia. I think of the people creating the kampong houses of Malaysia or Indonesia, or the Bahay Kubo of the Philippines. I think that a lot of those lessons are purely out of communities coming together to build. Those are the things that inspire me. In terms of the contemporary, I still am a big fan of Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano. They were the guiding lights for me when I looked at their Pompidou Centre when I was a student. And I guess it's being able to strike the balance between those star architects of the present with the heritage of the past that allows me to come up with the solutions that I do.
Wow, fantastic. I like the way you weave a little bit of history into it and looking into the future.
It has to be done. I think that it's all so easy for us to try and constantly reinvent the wheel. But I do think that reinterpreting past traditions is a wonderful way of ensuring that you are embedding a sense of culture and identity into the architecture. For instance, I was designing a building in Sweden, and this particular site had an old candy factory. This particular type of pastel called Lacquerol was a cough throat sort of medicine that you'd sort of pop a pastel in your mouth and hopefully it will go away. And we had the privilege of being able to design this site. So what we wanted to do is reinterpret some of the lessons that were learned from the previous Swedish community. We interviewed grandparents and they were telling us about how the Lacquerol candy factory was the provider of so many jobs in this region. We were able to take their quotes and then embed it into the concrete so that they are leaving a message for the younger generation.
So it's engraved then?
Engraving the words of the forefathers of this candy factory into the ground. Then you're supplementing that with obviously the sustainable design. We were using sustainable sources of materials like timber, cross-laminated timber construction, which is a very innovative method of designing in a sustainable way, incorporating lush gardens, incorporating beautiful balcony spaces. And when we were speaking to the local authorities, they said, no, there's no way you can put in your big terraces like you have in Singapore. But I said, look, Sweden is also experiencing one critical thing, and that's called climate change. And so days in the summer are getting longer. There's no reason why you couldn't put in these sky terraces. And slowly but surely, through an evidence-based approach to design, we were able to highlight that actually the evidence suggests that we should be able to have more of a terraced design that will obviously suit the needs of the Swedish individual.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And that was how long ago?
That was a couple of years ago. It's currently under construction. It will be completed towards the end of this year.
Okay. And you must have some current sustainable projects at hand or initiatives that you're excited about.
So
you
I
want
guess,
to relate one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're doing a lot of work in the Middle East. And that's always an interesting challenge because obviously when designing buildings in the tropics, we have particular climatic conditions to be able to deal with. But in the Middle East, we're dealing with really hot and arid climates. And that's another wonderful way of being able to look to the past, the courtyard-orientated developments of, for instance, Isfahan or Baghdad, and learn the lessons from previous generations to be able to influence the sustainable passive design solutions that we're creating. So we're doing a lot of work in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai. And I guess we're in a privileged position to do so because we're coming to the table as quite a neutral, sustainable design firm that is not trying to push a particular climatic condition onto a place. It could be very easy for me to say, hey, here's me as a half English, half Malaysian, Singapore-based architect, and I'm going to give you what we do in Singapore. But it's a completely different climatic condition. So we do need to be almost like a chameleon. We need to be able to mold ourselves to the condition of the climate, of the culture, of the people, of the place.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, there's so much talk about climate change, and now everybody is really talking about such an impact on the work that you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I understand that recently you published a new book. You want to talk us
Sure.
through the book,
So,
what it is?
I don't know. I mean, it's
Maybe
interesting.
the title first.
Yeah. So this is my 6th book now. I kind of get these itches that need to be scratched, and that is either a TV program or a book. And this current itch was looking at digital twins. And it's an interesting story as to how this came about, because the Secretary of State of Slovakia was on a plane flying to New York, and 50 minutes before landing, clearly had time on his hands and was flicking through the channels, and he came across my TV show on Smart Cities. And I was talking about virtual Singapore and the digital twin. What we're increasingly finding in smart cities is how the state or the governments are using big data as a means of being able to shape, measure, and monitor the built environment to try and increase operational efficiencies. And for him, it was a good opportunity to think, how can we try and transform Slovakia from a very analog world to a digital world? How can we transform our internal processes so that our cities and towns and neighborhoods can be more efficient, whether it's for the efficiency of people to be able to get to the shops, or paying a council tax bill digitally, or even for a developer to submit an online application for a planning approval. So out of that, we were appointed to design the national digital twin for Slovakia, which is effectively a 3D replica of the entire country.
Wow.
And to set up the data gateways to ensure that the different ministries could dump their data into a common platform, which would then be good for academia, industry and civil society to be able to either contribute to or to be able to extract data so that they can use it for their own purposes. So this book is basically a documentation of 8 global smart cities and their digital twins, how the digital twin can be used as a positive tool to check operational efficiencies of a city or a district or a neighborhood. And then the concluding chapters are very much about what we did for Slovakia and the National Digital Twin policy that then came out. The book launch will be on the 29th of April at the National Library, and looking forward to inviting JCU to attend as well.
Oh, for sure. I'll be there.
That's good.
Okay, and in your book, there is a mention about the hardware. Right?
Yes.
You talk about hard as in soft, and
Yes.
hardware, software, but the hardware part.
Yes.
Do you want to elaborate a little bit? about this
Absolutely,
hardware?
absolutely. A lot of the digital twins are very much 3D digital software replicas of the hardware of the physical world. So here we are in a space. Here we are in an office. This is hardware. This is bricks and mortar. This is our physical world. The digital twin is often a 3-dimensional replica of this in a software format. It is the software. The critical issue is that a lot of these digital twins do not capture the interactions of the people who inhabit the space. So it's all fine and well having the 3D replica, but really it is your and my imposition in the space that really counts. For instance, us switching on the light or us switching on the air conditioning immediately has that human intervention. We have decided to switch on these services, which obviously has an impact on our energy consumption, and it also alters the luminosity of the space, so on and so forth. So how can we possibly have a proper conversation about digital twins, hardware and software, without the hardware of our social interactions? And ultimately, the digital twin that we've captured for Slovakia really does look at this third sphere, the hardware, as a critical component. How can we capture data from people that can be providing a greater digital twin and therefore a more accurate reading of our daily practices?
I surely look forward to reading your book about this. Yeah. And so, how do you envision the evolution of this field over the next few decades?
I think there's going to be certainly a big role in terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning. It does, however, fill me with a bit of fear and dread, because at the end of the day, I am an architect who likes to roll up my sleeves and get a pen out, and I'm a bit analog in that fashion. You know, I do like to sketch still. I guess the issue comes for me when you start to cede too much responsibility over to commands that would be read by an artificial intelligent form that may very well be accurate. But let me give you a scenario. Let's just say, for instance, the South Bank Arts Complex in London. The South Bank Arts Complex has this undercroft, this concrete underbelly of the building that was completely void of character and identity. And it was a leftover space. But over the years, graffiti artists would come in and spray. BMX cyclists would come in and do stunts, and skateboarders would go in there. And before you know it, you've got a subculture. Then you also had secondhand bookshops wanting to sell books, secondhand record stores, the odd kind of food cart. All of a sudden, you're building up a flavor of character and identity. Now, had a digital twin be used and artificial intelligence employed to create the South Bank Arts Complex, would it have identified that space as unusable? And would it have programmed a use? Would it have tried to predict, okay, BMXers, graffiti artists, bookshops, blah, blah, blah? The outcome may be very different. And what scares me is when we are denying ourselves the opportunities for human spontaneity. The ability for us to do what we want with space, because those are the best kept secrets of our cities. The spontaneity that we can bring to the table when we get together creates those pockets, like however Club Street has turned out, or however the Marina Boulevard is turning out. What we want to do is ensure that there are enough leftover spaces that allow us to kind of populate them and enjoy them without them being overly programmed. So that's my fear. And I guess it's about tempering that with the ability to still put a hand on a piece of paper to suggest something, or stepping away and allowing civil society to make use of that space.
Okay. How do you think Singapore fare in this area?
That's a very good question. I think that it has for the longest time been overtly programmed. And that means that there was a rule for everything and a rule for the way that the space would be used and governed. I think we can see this very clearly in the differences between Clarke Quay and Boat Quay, for instance. Clarke Quay has been over-programmed insofar as that it was controlled by a corporation, and there was a very clear distinction as to how the waterfront would be used as a food and beverage environment. If you look at Boat Quay, it's still a food and beverage environment, but there was something slightly rough around the edges. It's because those spaces were slightly more spontaneous because they had so many different owners. And so I think that Singapore is going through the natural evolution. We've got to bear in mind that Singapore is still quite a youthful city-state. And so it's finding its feet in terms of trying to strike the balance between the overtly programmed and the spontaneous. I just hope it continues going in the direction that there can be more freedoms to express in terms of the way that we use the space.
Sure. And I bet you would have made your voice heard in this.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because we were behind the master plan for Kalang Alive, which is the 89-hectare sports, recreation and leisure district. Right. It included the National Stadium, the Singapore Indoor Stadium. And so we were able to shape some of those spaces to be slightly more fluid for the odd BMXer or mountain biker or skateboarder to actually go and do their thing. But ultimately, it was a great experience to be able to create such a landmark master plan that will have such an impact on people's lives. I think it's time for us as designers to also ensure that when we are designing spaces, we also think about active mobility, because the last thing we want is a situation where we're just going to be not walking, we're just driving everywhere, we're getting obese and we're becoming unhealthy. The ability to encourage active mobility by walking and cycling was a key element to this master plan that we created.
Fantastic. Okay, I remembered now a few years back, I thought I did hear you say about your involvement with the master plan. So
Indeed.
it has come to fruition.
It has indeed. The tennis centre and the football centre are currently under construction. Again, it's one of those projects that over the course of the next couple of years, we're going to be seeing a complete transformation of that area.
Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, beyond your professional pursuits, which you have many, what are some personal hobbies? Now we come to the personal side of things that you're passionate about.
Okay, so I have always been interested in martial arts. I was studying Aikido since I was 7 years old, obviously with age and
With what agents?
with age and with the pressures of work, I don't get to practice much anymore. But I was an instructor in Aikido.
Oh, wow.
I used to play a lot of rugby for the university. I still want to get out and run as much as possible. But when I do get the chance to be back in UK, which is usually about 2 or 3 times a year, I do like going to the theatre. So I'm a big
Not
Shakespeare.
Western?
Shakespeare. I'm a big Shakespeare buff. So I will go to the Globe Theatre. I am a big wine buff. So I do like the odd glass of wine, I say very, very carefully. So those are the things that sort of get me out of bed and get me excited at the weekend. And then obviously the passion for cities runs true, and I'm always drawn back to places like the Middle East. I find that the Middle Eastern culture is truly remarkable. I've spent a lot of time there over the years, and I continue to go back and be amazed. I mean, my most recent trip to Oman provided a wonderful experience because I realized that the Omani Empire was so diverse. And so, you know, the ability to hear people speaking not just Arabic and English, but also Hindi and Swahili because of its control of Zanzibar and parts of coastal India, shows the diversity and richness of the culture. So, yes, I as with any educator, I guess, you always find how little you know and how much more there is out there to learn. And so that's what I particularly like doing when I go on my travels.
Wow. We can sit here a whole day, Jason, talking about your adventures. Okay, if you were able to travel back in time,
Yes.
what advice would you give to your younger self, let's say 21-year-old?
Oh my goodness. Be courageous and ensure that you do not regret. And what I mean by that is you don't want to get to a point in life where you're talking to your grandchildren and you say, I could have done that, but I didn't. You know, you don't turn up to a baseball game and not take a few swings of the bat. Whether you hit the ball or not, you've got to get in the game and swing the bat.
Okay, I'll remember that. Wonderful, Jason. This has been a fantastic discussion, and I'm glad I have the opportunity to talk to you and discuss this with you. So if interested people and businesses would like to find out more about you, where do you think they can get in touch with you? Social media? Okay, so first of all, you can go to www.pomeroystudio.sg for our design works, www.pomeroyacademy.sg for our research, www.jasonpomeroy.sg for TV and books, and then you can catch me on Instagram at jasonpomeroy_arc. I think there's also LinkedIn at Jason Pomeroy. I think you'll be able to find us somewhere in that mix. Fantastic. Thank you again, Jason. It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.